Hello, my name is Tessa Asquith-Lamb and I'm an artist. I work at the City Arts Centre and other venues, running workshops and also leading described tours for the visually impaired. Today I'll be describing key works by the artist Adam Bruce Thomson. Adam Bruce Thomson was born in Edinburgh in 1885 and died in 1976. He studied at classes at the art department at Heriot-Watt College, Edinburgh, and then at the Trustees School of Art. He then studied at Edinburgh College of Art between 1908 and 1909, graduating with diplomas in drawing, painting and architecture, learning the printmaking methods of etching, dry point and lithography, and also worked in pastels and watercolours. During 1910, he travelled to Spain, Holland and Paris on scholarships before beginning to work at Edinburgh College of Art. He established a studio at Synod Hall, Castle Terrace in 1914. With the outbreak of World War I, he served in the Royal Engineers and made artworks of his wartime observations during this time. In 1918, he married Jessie Inglis Hislop, with whom he was to go on to have 3 children. After the war, in 1919, he resumed working at Edinburgh College of Art, where he taught etching, composition, still life, painting and colour theory. He was elected an academician of the Royal Scottish Academy in 1946 and was also president of the Society of Scottish Artists from 1936 to 7 and the Royal Society of Painters in Watercolour from 1956 to 63. He was awarded an OBE in 1963. He's known for his monumental images of Edinburgh and landscapes of Scotland, but also painted several significant portraits. I have chosen images that reflect his diverse skills in different materials, including tempera, oils, watercolours and pastels. The first image is titled Collington Bridge, the Valley in Snow, and is a landscape format tempera on paperwork from around 1937, measuring 50.3 centimetres high by 63.5 centimetres wide. Tempera paint was traditionally made with egg and pigment, but modern water-based tempera paints now use other binders. It dries to a flat finish and is not see-through like traditional watercolour. The artist uses loose brushstrokes to paint this broad view of the suburb of Collington, situated in the valley of the Water of Leith near Edinburgh. The artist's viewpoint is from the vicinity of Gillespie Road, with the new bridge viaduct spanning across the image. Trees of different varieties frame the view and appear in the distance. A fall of snow covers the ground. Just above halfway up the image are 3 arches of a tall viaduct, shown with dark shadows underneath. Under the central arch, a curving road disappears towards the right. This road extends towards us and cuts through the snow, and what look like footprints can also be seen, centre and to the lower left. An arched building sits to centre left and is backed by a clump of green pines and the form of a leafless, wintry tree to the far left, which is a vibrant green towards the top. A wall leads from the left to this building with a slightly stepped profile. To the right-hand side is another leafless green and brown tree stretching up from the snowy landscape to just above the level of the tall viaduct. At the back of this is a wall and further trees amid snowy white slopes. The foreground is filled with brown grasses peeking through the snow and sandy patches of ground showing through the white paint. A yellow van or bus with 4 windows is making its way along the viaduct with a blue shape in front, which may be another vehicle. The top of the viaduct has a band of white snow crisply defining a line across the centre of the image. Beyond the viaduct, some golden-coloured houses can be seen to the top right and a pointed tower slightly higher. Soft clumps of trees fill the centre of the space behind the level of the bridge, with much more skeletal trees painted to the 2 top corners against the snow. A narrow band of greyish winter sky with streaked clouds can just be seen at the very top of the image. Collington was a place well known to the artist, as his wife's parents lived in the area, and the family stayed there for several years during the 1930s. He is looking at it afresh in the snow here, enjoying how the white layer has changed the scene. His lively brushstrokes have an energy and lightness, and the snowy touches on tree branches and roofs feel almost Christmassy. The next image is titled The River Tweed Above Melrose and is an ink and watercolour landscape format work from 1966. It measures 32 centimetres high by 42 centimetres wide. This shows a view on the River Tweed near the Lowood Estate at Melrose, an area that inspired the artist repeatedly. This is a lively and sketchy ink drawing that has been coloured with watercolour. A pine tree on the right spans from top to bottom of the image, and beyond is a curve of river and more different types of trees and a figure in the water, perhaps a fisherman. The whole right-hand side of the image is mostly filled by the curving trunk and random wispy branches of a pine tree. The branches flap in various directions like ferns. Most of the branches point downwards. To the right of the yellow leaves of the pine is an autumnal leafy smaller tree, bottom right, with a pale V-shaped trunk. Behind the two trees is a suggestion of dark green landscape and pale blue sky, with some blue tones to the lower regions, signifying the waters of the river. The river itself emerges into the image from the lower left, snakes towards the right, then comes back to the left, before finally turning right again in a wavy line. It is painted blue, a tone that becomes darker as it recedes into the distance. A sandy beach-like area can be seen beyond a figure in the water in the centre. Sandy banks are cut away into green turf above the riverbank. A tall green pine and a brown-leaf deciduous tree stand side by side centre-left. Pale, peachy hills can be seen in the distance, and further brownish clumps of trees. The sky is greyish-blue and painted with soft swirls, inked curving lines, suggesting a windy day perhaps. Although Thomson lived in the city all his life, he loved walking and sketching in rural locations. Whenever he spent long periods in his Edinburgh studio, he talks of finding himself champing at the bit to return to the countryside. Next, I'll be describing From My Bedroom Window, an oil-on-canvas painting from the mid-1920s. It measures 50.8 centimetres high by 61 centimetres wide. This painting shows not only a still life subject, but also a landscape, opening up a domestic scene to a wider world. The still life element of this picture is a large, round, white wash basin with a towel draped across it, and this forms a diagonal, snaky line of towel from the centre of the image to the lower right, where its fringe can just be seen hanging over the edge of a brown wooden table with a shiny varnished top. The basin is also accompanied by a little round white dish with a lid to the lower left of the image. This is probably a soap dish. From the 19th century, well into the 20th century, lots of people would have been very familiar with large basins or bowls like this, which were accompanied by a big jug of ewer of water, and these would have a wash in the morning. You had them in your bedroom and you'd have your soap in the little lidded dish at the side, and that cloth is probably a towel across there. Behind the table is the large window filling most of the background. Bright light floods into the room, the kind of light you get on cold, dark days though. As it comes into the room, it's almost bleached out the top of the washstand or small table that the basin is set on. It looks really, really bright, but where the basin hides the bright white from us, we can only see the kind of rich, dark mahogany colour of the table, bottom centre. The bright light is also making some really intense dark shadows under the cloth that leads you into the picture. The landscape through the window is made up of a central mass of wintry blue trees, almost slightly moving in the breeze, reaching spindly branches up towards the sky. There's a sense of buildings around them, and in the distance, and especially on the right-hand side, where I can make out the gable end of a cottage or sort of slightly larger building with chimney pots. There are little lean-tos or sheds to the bottom right, and on the left-hand side, you've got the sense of maybe some grasses and a bit of a kind of stepped wall. The window is framed by the brilliant device of a scalloped pelmet and two golden buttery-coloured curtains that come in at the sides and frame the scene. To the lower right, I can just make out the window catch and part of the window frame. I imagine the artist looking out to see what kind of day it was and watching the trees gently moving in the breeze. The main colours used are icy blues. You can almost imagine the surface of the painting having quite a sort of chalky feel, a softness to it, especially as there's that kind of clump of smaller wispy trees within the shapes of much thicker, larger trees in the centre of the image, as if there's some sort of slightly smaller, spindly, almost like willow trees in the middle of this clump at the bottom of the garden that we can see out the window. The elevated setting is the artist's home at 149 Warrender Park Road, a 4-storey tenement in the Marchmont area of Edinburgh. It's an exercise in how you deal with space in a painting and tone, and combines a still life image and wider landscape very beautifully. The next image shows North Bridge and Salisbury Crags, Edinburgh from the northwest, an oil on canvas landscape format work from circa 1934. It measures 101.2 centimetres high by 127.1 centimetres wide. This is perhaps the artist's best known work and shows an epic view of Edinburgh from North Bridge to Arthur's Seat in the distance, in mostly brown tones with occasional highlights of pale beige and the colours of red buses and awnings by the bridge. I will be describing the image from the foreground to the background. In the foreground, to the left, is a domed building with pale stonework reaching up to the centre of the canvas. To the right of this are low grey rooftops and smoke from the trains in the station below the bridge. To the far right, dark shadows and rows of windows on tall buildings remind us how Edinburgh is built on hills, and its bridges create layers and expose these depths in dramatic views. North Bridge itself arches across the centre of the midground, lower on the left-hand side. The sides of the bridge are cut with recesses, and a large pier supports the arch lower left. Part of one arch and one entire other arch are visible. On top of the bridge are cars and a red double-decker bus. The awnings of a shop appear to the left of a large building. The bridge is a pale arch disappearing into the dark forms of 2 blocks of huge buildings on the centre right, with uneven, towering rooftops. Behind the bridge, the curve of Geoffrey Street leads up into the jumble of gables and rooftops of the old town, lit with bright sun and dark brown shadows. In contrast to the man-made works of buildings, most of the top half of the painting is filled with the craggy form of Arthur's Seat and Salisbury Crags. Greenish slopes lead up from the sandy fortress-like form of the crags, and beyond the hulking lion-shaped form of Arthur's Seat sits against a cloudy sky. The artist has chosen to include only a small amount of sky, choosing instead to concentrate on the huge sweep of buildings and landscape that makes up Edinburgh's unique cityscape. This oil on canvas is the largest known easel painting from a series of monumental Edinburgh views executed by Thomson in the 1930s. It garnered extensive press coverage when it went on display at the 1934 Society of Scottish Artists exhibition and was subsequently gifted to the City of Edinburgh. This coverage may have contributed to Thomson later receiving a commission to create another sweeping old town scene for the Edinburgh Savings Bank. Finally, I'll be describing Trees and Cattle, Collington, a landscape format pastel on paper drawing dating from the 1920s. It measures 25.4 centimetres high by 35.5 centimetres wide. This is an unusual work, very different from the others I've described, as it's a pastel. Soft chalk pastels are ideal for building up intense colours, and this work really highlights that quality. It shows an intense green field in the bright sunlight with cows laying down and grazing, framed by trees and darker shadows. This work is best described as having a dark green surround of landscape and trees, framing an intense acid green grass-covered hill with cows resting and grazing. To the lower right, a tall, thin tree with an uneven, twisty shape leads from the lower right to the top right. It seems to have clusters of vivid green leaves, like a rowan perhaps. To the left, a larger tree reaches into the image with brown branches and lush green leaves. A dark green shadow falls from lower left to the centre. On the slope of the hill, against the vivid lime green grass, are several horned cows. The one nearest to us is black and white and lays with its back to us and head pointing right. To the right of this cow is another black and white animal, this time standing and grazing to centre right. Above these two are three more, all laid down in a group, but these ones are russet red, brown and white. Behind the cows, at the top of the curve of the hill, is a clump of trees against a vivid blue sky. I used pastels as a student, and they have a brightness and immediacy, and I can almost feel the sort of residue on my fingers thinking of blending the colours together to create an image like this. Pastels became an important medium for the artist, especially in the 1920s. Thomson used them for portraits and in small-scale landscapes and rural views. The dual bright colours available in pastels contrast with the artist's more monochrome printed works. Pastels were also appealing on a practical level. They could easily be carried and used away from the studio. His skill in this medium caught the attention of contemporary critics. In 1927, an article in The Studio noted that his experimental exploits with pastels had led to some distinctly captivating and intrinsically artistic results. I hope you have enjoyed these descriptions of the works of Adam Bruce Thomson today. His work spans many different subjects, and he was skilled in using very different materials. There's a fine energy in his ink and watercolour works, and his painted works translate his draftsmanship into something more solid and more to do with contrasts of light and dark. He's at home expressing the quiet balance of a still life and the ordinary everyday objects, familiar bedroom items with a view beyond into something so pleasing and coolly beautiful in its blue and shadowed balance. But he can also show you huge sweeps of townscape and the complexity of Edinburgh, somehow compressed into a busy and vibrant rectangle of warm tones of brown and beige. His pastels remind me of the vibrancy of this medium and just how suited they are to creating the effect of bright sunlight. In fact, many of his images are concerned with highlights and shadows and have a sense of the balance of those things. I have enjoyed exploring more about how this artist's varied works make me feel. They give me this overall impression of them, a sense of capturing a mood alongside dark and light effects. I particularly like how he captures Edinburgh's weather, the cold days and snow beyond the window, and the sense of light as this white layer transforms the everyday. I love in particular his epic Edinburgh cityscape, which creates such an iconic and characterful view of the city, familiar but spectacular.